Hi, welcome back to Rambling Roxy's Adventures in Writing. As we've talked about before, I'm a middle school writing teacher and a social studies teacher. And I'm also an author of several kids' picture books that my kids love, but we won't worry about that. And several middle school age mysteries. I put the links in if you want to check them out, but they're cool mysteries set in on an archaeology dig, in the carnival where I grew up, and the archaeology dig is where I did some work in college on an archaeology dig, not in the same place, but fun little twist. Anyways, so I have some experience in teaching writing, but also in being a writer myself. On top of all the papers that you have to write for college and all that stuff, I also got to do some fun writing for me and to share some stories. Well, today we're going to delve a little bit more into writing. We've talked about several aspects of the writing process, and today we're going to be talking about plot. Just plodding along. I wonder what that is. You might ask. Well, a plot is your story. Without a plot, you don't have a story. It is the main events that happen in a story and in your story. Now, there's many ways that you can go about coming up with a plot for your story. I know I like to daydream all these cool things happening, and they pop up in thought bubbles around. I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if that happened? Oh, what about this? Sometimes, it's right before I go to sleep at night, or I'm driving along and I see something, I'm like, oh, it's a cool house. I wonder how I could work that into a mystery. But you just can't write a story that's constantly jumping settings and having all kinds of things happen all at once. That's going to be a little bit confusing. Have you ever watched a movie like that? Yeah, probably didn't get a lot of good reviews. You also don't want something that is too short in the action either. That's why it's kind of good to, even though you have all these great ideas, is to write it down a little bit before you write the actual story. So I find it helpful, personally, to make a mind map of sorts to find out what will happen. I'll put a larger version of this in here for you to look at the end. But basically, you have the beginning of the story. You have rising action, so some big things that could be happening leading up to the climax. So if someone, like in one of my books, the girl gets kidnapped. So before she gets kidnapped, there's all these rising action things that lead up to her kidnapping. Because generally when you're being kidnapped, someone just doesn't snag you off the street. If you're being kind of stalked by a person, there's things that are happening. So I kind of have all these spooky kind of things that happen to her before the main event happens. And then you have the following action. So then you have all the things that the characters do to kind of help move towards the ending and resolve that. So if she's being kidnapped, how is she escaping the kidnapper? Is the end of your story to be that the kidnapper pays for the crimes or something? Then you need to incorporate that in there. So sometimes it is best to write the end first to figure out what you want to happen at the end of the story. Maybe you don't want your main character to make it out, or one of the side characters. I don't know. It's your story. It doesn't have to be a mystery either. But whatever your story is, kind of figure out how do you want the story to end? Is there a main theme to the story? Is there something you want people to learn? Something about friendships and how you should treasure friendships over anything else. So maybe your story is about friends and they had a falling out. And how do they resolve that conflict and come back together and be friends again? Or maybe they're never friends again. I don't know. It's up to you. It's your story. But that's kind of one of those things where it's good to write it down and kind of go through what could happen. And I have this written as a small, teeny tiny piece, but it depends on how big your story is. Maybe you need to have a lot more things happening in there. And it doesn't, when you're writing this, think of it, it's like a mind map. It's notes. So you don't have to go through every single thing, like in Kai's Secret. She's going to discover what's going on with all of these, her main goal is that there's artifacts disappearing from the museum and the reservation, and there's lots of them disappearing. So like each one of those is like someone breaks in and like steals another artifact. One in the museum, and one in the on the reservation itself on the dig site. And then the big climax is like, you know, figuring out, like, she's like, oh my gosh, like, I know why they're doing this. They're stealing these artifacts because they want to do this. And then she's going to try to find ways to catch them in the act and kind of get them to pay for their crimes and return the artifacts. So you kind of have to figure out what you want to do in those in between times. And it doesn't have to be a long line. It can just be artifacts stolen in a museum, artifacts stolen in a dig site. And then you can, if you have some other big things that you want to happen, you can make a side note on there. It's your notes, so it's good to make sure you understand them. So basically there's a couple big things that you want to determine. You want to know the ending of your story. That'd be good to know. Do you want to have a happy ending? Do you want to have a reconciliation? Do you not want to have one? There's lots of stories, like the Hunger Games, that it doesn't really end the way that we would like it to, right? But that kind of leaves you wanting to know more, and I don't know, it just kind of depends on what you like as a writer and what you like as a reader. And then you figure out how you want your story to end. You also need to figure out what your problem or the main conflict of your story is going to be. There's lots of different kinds of conflict. Like I talked about, it could be like best friends have a falling out over, you know, their video game. Like my kids have falling outs all the time over their toys. And then they resolve the conflict. Next thing you know, they're building something together and working on their tower. However, but these can be bigger conflicts too. Like I said in the one book, the girls being kidnapped. In the other story, there's artifacts being stolen, and it's kind of greatly impacting the archaeology site itself. So just think about these problems that you want to have in your story. And like I said, I like to write mysteries and find that coming up with a problem is like the easiest thing to do. As I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, oh, what could this, what's kind of the whole premise of my story going to be about? Because it's a mystery, something has to be going on. So I think of what I want the main event to happen, the main problem. And then I kind of work through that on my own. So then I figured out, so like with Kai's Secret, I kind of put in there that the main problem was going to be stolen artifacts, you know. Then I figured out how and why they were being stolen. So she has to go through all those steps. And then I figured out how Kai was going to catch them and like what would end up happening to the person in the end. But maybe your problem is someone moved, someone's being bullied, somebody wants to win the championship game of whatever sport that you enjoy playing. Maybe it's the championship chess tournament. There's all kinds of different things. Think of something that you would be interested in. Maybe someone in your story wants that guy or girl to notice them. And it doesn't always have to be a mystery. Remember, no matter what your plot is, it's good to have a general sense of the major points before you start. Like I like to have the ending before I have the beginning, because then you can kind of see where you want your story to go. It's kind of easy to figure out the beginning later. So don't be surprised if you go to make your mind map, if maybe you start there with the problem first. Either one of those is good. And then as you do those, you just kind of plug in some other things that you would like to happen. And that's a great way to kind of work on your plot. If you have any questions, feel free to type a question underneath and I will try my best to answer it for you. But like I said, when you're plotting along, this is a great way to just make a mind map. Maybe you're thinking of something as you're driving along in the car. Maybe your mind map is on your phone and you can just draw on a saved thing. That's a good thing because it's always with you. But I tend to have something to write with all the time. So you just write down those things. Maybe they're on separate pieces of paper and you combine them together later and you're like, you know what, this other idea was not so good. I'm going to cross it out and go with this other one that I had in the car too. That's kind of part of the editing process as well. Sometimes you do the editing while you're writing and think, no, this wasn't a strong enough conflict, or this wasn't a strong enough action leading up to the big climax of the story. But like I said, I enjoy kind of mapping out where I'm going with things, and I hope that that's helped you as a writer kind of help figure out where you're going. Thanks for tuning in, and keep on writing, and don't forget to subscribe.